Good morning and peace be upon you this beautiful day, wherever you're tuning in from. My name is Qasim Rashid, and this is the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View, channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. If you're watching on Substack, make sure you hit that subscribe button so we can keep creating this content. I've got a really powerful show today. Diana Buttu is here. She is a Palestinian Canadian human rights lawyer, an international human rights lawyer who has worked intimately, deeply on the Israeli-Palestinian negotiations. She was the only female negotiator on the team in the 5 years that she was doing this work. And I've been familiar with her work for quite some time, but she made a quote a couple of weeks after 10/7 that has just stuck with me. And it's something I've thought about a lot. And the quote is that we are told that nothing justifies 10/7, but yet 10/7 justifies everything. And as we see the horrific mass murder and genocide that has ensued as a result, her words, as painful as they are that much more true. As we see the ICJ file cases against the government of Israel for war crimes, and the ICC, the International Criminal Court, file war crimes arrest warrants against Netanyahu, credibly accused of war crimes, and the perpetuation of these injustices, everything from the Israeli government breaking the ceasefire that they agreed to firing upon Palestinian civilians as they, sought aid that was denied to them by the Israeli government, aid that was blocked by the Netanyahu regime. As we see the Israeli government drop 2,000-pound bombs onto Palestinians in safe zones, we begin to understand just how accurate Diana is. And I am grateful to have her on the show in these difficult times because she is undoubtedly one of the premier voices globally on this issue. She can speak from not just a scholarly and academic perspective, but from a lived experience, from the experience that only somebody who is Palestinian can. And in times like these, elevating the voices of those who are marginalized and dehumanized, to me, is a critical, not just an act, but is an obligation. And I consider it my obligation to use my platform to raise these voices. And as you listen to the interview, I'm not going to have a long intro. I'm going to go to break in just about a minute or so and bring her on here. And as you listen to her share her experiences and share her scholarship, I want you to really pay attention to the stories that she talks about, because these stories are what helps us humanize people. And it's a reminder that this isn't just statistics, right? We talk about, the Lancet says there's more than 200,000 killed. Harvard says more than 300,000 killed. The Gaza Health Ministry documents 60,000 killed conservatively, but they've stopped counting because they're so decimated in their infrastructure. We talk about the tens of thousands of orphans. We talk about the fact that hundreds of journalists have been killed. These are all statistics, but every statistic is, behind it is a story, the individual stories that we need to be cognizant of, that we need to be aware of. And she shares some of these stories, really painful stories that I think paint the picture of just what we're dealing with, what we're up against. And as you listen to these stories, understand that these are our own stories as well. Think about what you would do if you were in that situation, if your child was harmed or abused in that situation, if you had to suffer 77 years of military occupation of your homeland. Right now, Los Angeles has just gone past about 35 days, about 5 weeks of military occupation, and people are rightfully outraged. Imagine that not being 35 weeks, but 77 years, and what that would do to you, to your psyche, to your mentality. And so I'm grateful to have her on. I want you all to understand the work that she's doing, the critical work she's doing, and support her and elevate her work, because we need more voices like her in the mainstream to push back against the disinformation and the misinformation that's out there. And I think after listening to her, you'll have a better appreciation for just how devastating the situation is and what you can do to play a more meaningful role to bring about a sense of justice. All right, with that, we're going to go to break. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on SiriusXM. When we come back, I'm excited and grateful to have Diana Buttu, Palestinian Canadian international human rights lawyer, to discuss what's happening in Palestine, what's happening in Gaza, and what role you can play to help push back against these injustices. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. If you're watching on Substack or listening on YouTube, make sure you hit that subscribe button so we can keep creating this content. I'm extraordinarily excited about our guest today. Diana Buttu is one of the most prolific international human rights lawyers around. She is a Canadian Palestinian scholar. She has been at Harvard. I could read her bio. It will take you 10 minutes to get through it, but the key elements that I want to focus on are her immense work on Israeli-Palestinian negotiations, the only female negotiator during her 5-year tenure. And I first became aware of her years ago, but this quote that she said shortly after 10/7 has been running through my mind, that we are told that nothing justifies 10/7, but that 10/7 justifies everything. And as we see the genocide that has ensued since then. And by some studies, more than 300,000 Palestinians have been killed in this indiscriminate bombing. Those words of wisdom just are that much more powerful. Diana, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Qasim. It's nice to be with you.
You know, we are going through a very difficult time globally. The level of global upheaval seems to be increasing, and the attacks on Iran from Israel, to me, seem less like an actual response to a threat and more like a way to distract from what's happening in Gaza as well. You've been at the forefront of this for a very long time and are one of the foremost scholars on this. Just kind of a general question, what's your overall assessment? How are you handling all these developments and kind of the status of where we are right now? I know it's not a very specific question, but I wanted to give you the floor just to kind of provide your overview of where we are and what's happening right now.
I think you're absolutely right that a lot of what has been happening over the course of the past few months has been specifically designed to take our eyes away from Gaza. And it's in order to normalize genocide and to normalize starvation and to normalize bombings and to normalize bombing hospitals and bombing schools and everything that we see happening in Gaza. And so specifically when it came to Israel bombing Iran, we saw that it became normal for Israel to bomb Gaza and kill upwards of 100 Palestinians a day, including at food distribution sites, and that it wasn't getting any coverage. And instead, the mainstream media was focused on whether Iran was being hit or whether Iran was hitting Israel and so on. And they're lost in all of that was the fact that Israel was continuing and has continued to carry out genocide. And part of that was because, if you remember, leading up to Israel's attack on Iran, there was starting to be growing opposition to this genocide, including within Europe, where we started to see world leaders expressing dissent against this genocide for the first time. It only took them 20 months. And so a lot of this is just designed to do that.
I think you're also referring to the joint letter written by the United Kingdom, Germany, France, and a few other powerful Western nations, nuclear-powered nations, acknowledging these war crimes finally, and even threatening to cut off aid and supplies and to start to boycott the Netanyahu regime. And it's just the dog wagging the tail or the tail wagging the dog, whatever the term is. It's kind of what we're seeing here. I want to talk a bit more about the children in this scenario because, as human rights lawyers, we can both acknowledge that the killing of civilians on 10/7 is a war crime. That's not something we say hesitatingly. That's a pretty straightforward statement. What I'm enraged by is the assertion that 10/7 happened in a vacuum, that it just happened magically one day. People were just minding their own business. And I always point out that in the year prior to 10/7, in the West Bank especially, we have the deadliest year on record over the last 20 years for Palestinian civilians killed at the hands of the Israeli military. Estimates report at least 247 Palestinians killed, more than 50 children killed. And you can't even make the excuse, as bad as excuse as it is, but that it was, Hamas was provoking something. Well, this is the West Bank. Hamas has no control or authority over there. And my question to folks always is, what would you do if dozens of your children were being killed? What would you do if hundreds of your neighbors were being killed by an occupying military army? And I never get an answer out of them because I think they understand that when you drive people to extremism, terrible things can happen. How do we better inform the public of just the narrative of what it's like living under occupation? I've been to occupied Palestine. I've had guns drawn on me by the IDF, demanding my papers or else. And I'm a US citizen. I'm an attorney. I know my rights. If that's how I'm being treated, just imagine what a Palestinian child must go through on a daily basis. What should we be doing that we're not doing right now to better tell these stories that apparently aren't breaking through into the mainstream?
But part of it is that there has been a deliberate and consistent policy and campaign to dehumanize Palestinians. And the fact that we look at this one day and view that history began on this one day
Yeah.
is the height of dehumanization of Palestinians. It ignores the decades of military occupation and it ignores the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. It ignores what happened to my personal family. It ignores what's happened to me personally. It ignores not only everything that you've mentioned, but ignores the daily lived reality of Palestinians. But that's done deliberately. That's done deliberately because it's been a consistent policy on the part of the Israelis and very much promoted by a lot of mainstream media to somehow say that Palestinians, they just have to get used to it. It's just part of their life. It's part of their landscape. But it's not, it shouldn't be part of my life. It shouldn't be part of my landscape. And so the things that need to be done for that to be broken is for them to realize that, again, it shouldn't, that they need to live our lived experience. And for you, as you said, you came here, you saw, you had the weapons drawn on you. That's not going to happen to everybody. But unless and until they're able to make that connection, unless and until they're able to see that this is not normal, they're going to continue to live with this sense that somehow the lived realities of Palestinians, that occupation is just comes with the territory. And so we have to fight against this dehumanization campaign. And that's what Palestinians have been fighting against for decades. And we have to label it, we have to call it out. So when I say that it seems that according to the world, nothing justifies October the 7th, but October the 7th just seems to justify everything. It's me calling out these deliberate policies of dehumanization. And we have to continue to do that to make people aware that they're putting some people's lives above the lives of other people. And that's just not okay. That's just not right. And we shouldn't be normalizing occupation. We shouldn't be normalizing the killing of children. We shouldn't be normalizing home demolitions, imprisonment of people, ethnic cleansing. That should just not be normalized.
Yeah. There's a projection with so much. Of course, we have empathy for the Israeli hostages that are suffering right now. Why doesn't that empathy also extend to the 10,000 Palestinians that are held in Israeli prisons without due process of law, without charge, without prosecution? Children, thousands of whom, and this is reported by B'Tselem, by Israeli human rights organizations, that these children are suffering sexual abuse, broken bones, physical abuse, being locked in cages, starvation, beatings. That dehumanization is just as important, and the fact that it's systemic and backed by a nuclear armed country that by the way has not signed the nuclear non-proliferation treaty should make it even more discouraging. What do you make of this recent poll, Diana? And if you're just tuning in, we're speaking with Diana Buttu, a brilliant international human rights lawyer, of Palestinian Canadian human rights lawyer. This recent poll that came out, I think just last month, that found that 82% of Jewish Israelis back expelling Palestinians from Gaza altogether. This is ethnic cleansing, the textbook definition of it. What are we to make of that? Because I think on one hand, we can recognize that Netanyahu is a corrupt politician. His own government is indicting him for bribery charges. He's facing, accountability, maybe not after the Trump intervention. And you can argue that, well, a people can't be accountable for just their corrupt elected leaders. I wouldn't want to be held accountable for Trump's corruption, so I can't hold Israelis accountable for Netanyahu's corruption. But then these polls come out that 82% support expelling Gazans altogether, Palestinians altogether from Gaza. How do how do we process that? How do you process that?
Look, I'm not surprised. I'm not at all surprised. And by the way, this isn't at all new. As far back as I believe it was 1994, Itzhak Rabin, who was once prime minister, said that he hoped to wake up one day and find that Gaza had sunk into the sea. Okay, so this is nothing new. You can't say that this is the result of a specific date. This has long been an Israeli fantasy. And I'm not at all surprised because you have to remember how Israel was created. Israel was created through the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. And so throughout the entire existence of the state, the people who are living in the state, they're either people who are have carried out the Nakba, or they're Nakba apologists, or they're Nakba deniers, and that's it, right? That's the formation of the state. And so that 82% does not at all surprise me. There's another statistic that was in that same poll, which is that 56% of the people who were polled also want to see people like me, Palestinians who hold Israeli citizenship, also ethnically cleansed. But it gets a little bit even deeper. Of that number, the numbers are even higher among youth. So those people who are under the age of 40, the segment is the highest for those people who are under the age of 40. So unlike in other parts of the world where you get youth that have more liberal views, in Israel, it's actually more extremist. So we see that something like 60% of people under the age of 40 want to see Palestinians Palestinians like me, ethnically cleansed. Again, it's not at all surprising because it's a state that was founded on the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. It's a state that still talks about it. They're Nakba apologists, Nakba deniers, or the ones who have carried out the Nakba themselves. And so it's not at all surprising. The problem, of course, is that in all of this, nobody has ever been held to account. And that's why I talk about this issue of dehumanization, that if we continue along this path of somehow pretending that Israel is just normal, that it's just okay, that it's what they're doing is just kind of, what did you expect? Then you're paving the way for this continual dehumanization of Palestinians, and you're paving the way for not only normalization of what they did in the past, but normalization of genocide. And that's the part that's scary.
That it's shifting the Overton window consistently and making it easier and easier to accept the atrocities that are happening. I mean, even right now, we saw in the early days of Israel's assault on Gaza, this collective punishment, first just the demonization of UNRWA and the aid that they were providing. And even though you had US leadership stating unequivocally that no, there's no terrorists here, there's no violence here, there's no attempts to cause harm to anyone here. We're just providing aid to people who are displaced and are in desperate need of aid. We've gone from that to the complete dismantling of that aid, to the Israeli government demanding that they fully control what aid gets in. And now, as you just mentioned a moment ago, as Palestinians are coming to those aid sites that the Israeli government established, they're getting fired upon and massacred, literally like shooting fish in a barrel. I mean, it's that dehumanizing of a nature. And I think I just think that Americans aren't understanding the global phenomenon is that the global South, for example, I think does understand very clearly. I think folks remember apartheid South Africa and the impact that that had. I think on the local level we're understanding, but it's those in power. I saw another recent poll that was actually very encouraging here in the United States. I'm just reading the data here that when it comes to Democrats, um, Democrats sympathize back in 2017 more with Israel by 13 points. And Democrats under 50, it was by 14 points. This is back in 2017. Now, Democrats as a whole sympathize with Palestinians by 43 points, and under 50, they sympathize with Palestinians by 57 points.
Yeah.
And this is exciting because you're beginning to see that the folks that were hoping are on the right side of history are actually vocalizing their views and their opinions. They're not just hiding in the shadows anymore, and they're playing. They're being public about it, and we're seeing some candidates for office. Abdul Al Sayed, an Arab American, I think he's Egyptian. His wife is Palestinian, running for U.S. Senate. I just saw a poll that came out today where he's within the margin of error of the AIPAC funded candidate in that race as well. So we're seeing some opportunities to grow and develop, which is very, very exciting. Um, what do you take away from this? I know polls are just kind of a snapshot, but what do you take from this? What should elected representatives be doing right now to recognize this, and what kind of changes would you want to see in the way politics is done going forward, especially as it relates to Israel-Palestine?
Look, I'm not a US citizen, so I can't really speak to that, but I do want to say something about the polling. It's taken 57,000 Palestinians to be killed that we know of. This is a very conservative number. The bombing of 36 hospitals, the flattening of major Palestinian cities, including Rafah, for the numbers to change.
Yeah.
That to me is terrifying. And I know that globally, that people stand with Palestine. I know that globally. The bigger issue is, what is it going to take for policy to actually change? And this is where I think the energy needs to go, is in terms of actual policy change. And we are starting to see that there is change in policy because there is this global outrage. But just the weight of what has had to happen. I want to share a little story with you about a friend in Gaza who was saying to me that, when you think about children in the United States and when they look up in the sky, they see, what do they see? They see birds. Sometimes they see a plane flying above. Kids in Gaza look up in the sky. They see drones. They see fighter jets. They've never seen a commercial flight. And overwhelmingly, they look up and they say, Mommy and Daddy are up there.
Mm.
This is what children in Gaza are living through these days. And the injustice that has been meted out to these kids, highest number of child amputees in the world. The fact that these kids are like being killed in what's called, we're referring to as Hunger Games now. Policy has got to change. And this genocide has got to come to an end. And people have to be held accountable for the positions that they've taken throughout the course of the past 21 months of this genocide. And if not, I don't know what to say. I don't know what more to say.
There are, by conservative estimates, around 40,000 orphans in Gaza right now, by very conservative estimates. There have been entire family lineages wiped out by drone strikes, by 2,000-pound bombs. A New York Times investigation, an NBC investigation found that at least on 200 occasions, that's a very conservative estimate, the Israeli military instructed Palestinians to go to a safe zone. And then after Palestinians gathered in those safe zones that were supposed to be, free of being bombed, the Israeli military bombed those safe zones more than 200 times. And and you know this, but I think our listeners need to hear this from you. One of the most difficult things to prove about genocide is the intention aspect, that they intentionally killed innocent civilians. How is someone going to argue that sending civilians to a safe zone hundreds of times and then dropping your most powerful bomb on that safe zone is anything but intentional? Either there's only two possibilities here. Either it's intentional, in which case you've committed genocide and you need to be held accountable through the ICC and the ICJ, the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice, or you are so incompetent and so hopelessly just a horribly incompetent person that you have no business having any kind of power or authority. And even then, incompetence is not an excuse for war crimes. Those are the two options. I'm trying to understand, why is that not getting through to folks? It's mind-boggling. What has happened in our society that that level of dehumanization is considered okay? And simultaneously, as we're watching the atrocities unfold in Gaza, we see the same news anchors who say, well, that's just war. That's just what happens. Shedding tear after tear for Ukrainians being unjustly attacked by Putin, who's trying to take land that isn't his. It's just, I guess I'm ranting at this point. It's just amazing to me that we have two side-by-side examples. And on one, they can see the humanity of Ukrainian people and recognize that what they're suffering through is horrific and wrong and unjust, and that Putin is a war criminal, credibly accused by the ICC, and he should be arrested. But yeah, when Netanyahu does that and worse, it's excused. Let me form this into a question then. So for those who don't have the platforms that you might have, Diana, who may not have the ability to articulate this as thoroughly and as effectively as you do, what can ordinary folks do? What should ordinary folks be doing to help push the Overton back to a place of justice, back to a place of compassion, back to a place of humanization of Palestinian people, not at the expense of Jewish people? And I want to be clear about that, right? Not at the expense of Jewish people, but at the same time, in the same compassion that we have for Jewish hostages, we should have for Palestinians being mass murdered at a minimum. What can ordinary folks do to rebuild that humanization and compassion for the Palestinian community?
A few things. So first is, don't take your eyes off of Gaza. And there are real attempts to try to stifle Gaza on all of these social media platforms, which are not very social, by the way. There are very concerted attempts to try to stifle what is coming out of Gaza, everything from the images, the videos, to you name it. The other thing is, I think it's really important to highlight what these soldiers themselves are projecting. I mean, we've seen so many videos of soldiers wearing women's lingerie, smoking cigarettes, and then blowing up universities as they're doing it, dedicating a save the date to while as they blow up a Palestinian house, stealing Palestinian homes, smashing Palestinian everything, looting. And in each and every one of them, we see them committing these crimes. It's not as though they're not doing it. They're doing it live. They're broadcasting it. They're not ashamed of what they're doing because they know that nobody's ever going to do anything about it. So we have to make sure that people see all of this. But we also have to humanize, and it's not the term, but we have to make sure that we are not forgetting that that there are real people behind those images that we're seeing. For example, everybody talks about the Israelis that are in Gaza. Nobody talks about Dr. Hussam Abu Safiyyeh, who was a doctor who was kidnapped from a hospital and has been held in an Israeli prison incommunicado for months now. And he's one of several. Nobody's talking about the hundreds of journalists, of paramedics, of you name it, that we have no idea how many there are that are being held in these prisons. We have to keep talking about the people we do know about and what's been happening to them, as well as the people we don't know about. And if we just keep talking about them in numbers, it never really resonates. But instead, we have to tell their stories, because behind each and every person, there is a human story. And in the telling of our stories, we have to make sure that everybody is aware of precisely what is going on in Gaza, because again, we cannot just let this be normalized. It's inhumane what is happening. It is totally inhumane what is happening, and we cannot let this be normalized. We simply cannot.
If you're just tuning in, we're speaking with Diana Buttu, international human rights lawyer, Palestinian Canadian scholar, and just one of the most prolific voices in the world today. A privilege to have her here. Diana, before you go, speaking of stories, there is one story I'd like for you to share from your own perspective, because I think our audience needs to hear it. And I think it's a story that we need to keep telling over and over again. And that is the story of Hind Rajab
Yeah.
and what she went through, because I don't think enough people understand, one, what her story is, and two, how sadly common her story is. So if I can burden you, I know it's a painful story, but I think we need folks to hear it. If I can ask you to share that story, I'd be grateful.
You know, where do I begin with Hind Rajab? Where do I begin? Other than Hind Rajab was you know, a little 6-year-old girl who went in a car with her uncle and her cousins. And her car, the Israelis shot at the car. She got the paramedics, she got on the phone with her mom. Her mom then got on the phone with paramedics in across into the West Bank. The paramedics coordinated to get an ambulance to get to her because she was bleeding, because she had been shot too. And instead of the ambulance being able to make it to Hind, the ambulance paramedics were also shot and killed too. Hind's body, along with her uncle, along with her cousins, was found several days later. And they were in an area that they were told was safe. And the movement of the paramedics was coordinated. And there are recordings of this little girl's voice, recordings of her seeing the people around her being assassinated, being killed. No 6-year-old should be going through that. No 6-year-old should be shot. And the fact that the only reason that we know about her is because we have these recordings. Think about all of the people we don't have recordings for. Think about all the other kids we don't have recordings for. We have stories of people who've been used as human shields, who've been sent down into tunnels. The reason that they were sent down into tunnels because the Israelis took sympathy on the dogs that used to be used to go down into the tunnels, instead decided to use humans. We have testimonies of people who have been raped. We have just endless testimonies of the things that have been happening to people. And it's painful. And it's painful to hear it, and it's painful to retell it. And it has to be retold because, again, this isn't something that the Israelis should be getting away with. These people should be held to account. And instead, in the case of rape, when the soldiers were found to be raping Palestinians who they had kidnapped and thrown into prison. By the way, these were not people who were charged with anything. They were people they had kidnapped. Israelis literally went out and protested for the right to be able to rape them. Okay.
Right.
This is so deeply troubling. I live in a place that is so deeply troubling. In a society that thinks that it's okay to kill 17, 18,000 kids, that can justify bombing 36 hospitals, that can justify the flattening of whole cities, that can justify wiping 90% of the buildings out that used to exist in Gaza, wiping them off the map, that can justify shoving 80% of Gaza's population into 18% of its territory, that can justify using rape. It's so deeply disturbing. And if they're not held to account, just imagine what's going to happen next.
Yeah, I know these are difficult times and difficult stories, and I'm extraordinarily grateful for your voice and for your courage and your relentlessness to continue to speak up for voices that have been silenced, that are not allowed or able to speak up. You always have a platform here to continue to speak truth to power and to uphold justice. Before we go, I'd love for you to share with our listeners how people can follow your work, how they can support you, and how they can reach out to you.
So on all of the social media platforms at Diana Buttu, I've got it you can see it up on the screen there, and also on Substack.
Diana Buttu, a privilege and a pleasure to have had this conversation with you. Certainly not under the best circumstances, but we're with you. We're going to continue to fight for that humanity and justice that every person deserves, and we hope to have you back on soon.
Thank you.
You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View, channel 126. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View, channel 126. That was Diana Buttu, Palestinian, Canadian, international human rights lawyer, and one of the most prolific and foremost scholars on Palestine and what's happening in Palestine. One of the world's most prolific and foremost scholars, someone who I highly encourage each of you follow and support, subscribe to, do all the things, because we need to elevate these voices, folks. Like, this is the bottom line. Corporate media is capitulating, it's collapsing. It's being bought out by billionaires, and it's become a mouthpiece for billionaire oligarchs to do their bidding. That's really fundamental. And I've talked about this at length. This is not news. This is not new. We need a return to the actual academics and scholars. We are in this phase of anti-intellectualism in the United States where universities and academics are being arrested and denounced and trounced. And we've seen this happen globally. We've seen this happen in Russia and in Cambodia and in so many nations that resulted in falling into some kind of autocratic rule. And so this is why I say we cannot be bystanders to our own demise. We need to invest in the people doing the critical work. Diana Buttu is one of the people doing the critical work, and I highly encourage you to support her. What I want to close the show with is actually related to what we're talking about. When we talk about the dehumanization of Palestinians, we're seeing a similar dehumanization of the broader American Muslim community. As a result of this genocide on Gaza, we're seeing the assault on American Muslims broadly here as well. And it's shocking and at the same time predictable. But the data that we're seeing, the spike in anti-Muslim hate is truly jarring. Did you know there are 8,760 hours in a year, right? You do 24 times 365, you get 8,760. Last year in 2024, there were 8,658 anti-Muslim discrimination complaints. That's essentially one act of anti-Muslim discrimination for every hour of every day for all 365 days of the year. It's the highest ever recorded since CARE began gathering this data back in 1996. It's even higher than in the year after 9/11, a year I remember extremely well. What we're seeing unfold isn't just a political attack on like a single candidate, right? I'm talking about Zoran Mamdani. It's an all-out campaign to normalize anti-Muslim bigotry in the United States and then globally as well. And guess what? It's working, folks. It is working. This dehumanizing hate ultimately leads to violence against minority communities. And I'm guessing this data point that I just shared of 8,658 anti-Muslim discrimination complaints, this is the first you've actually heard about how severe this crisis has become. A few of you are highly attuned, and I commend you for knowing this data point. But for the majority of you out there, despite being engaged on these things, and I know you find these issues important, that's why you're tuning into the show. But despite you being engaged, you probably haven't heard this on any other corporate media outlet or mainstream media outlet because it just doesn't get clicks. Demonization gets clicks, but documenting it does not. And that's just it, right? This 8658, this is just the documented discrimination complaints. It does not even do justice to how bad the situation actually is. We're being told that the real threat is not fascism, but a Muslim who might become mayor. We're seeing this across media, across politics, across tech. The message is consistent that a Muslim who challenges the system is a threat, but a racist who maintains this threat is somehow a leader. This is not just harming the 4 to 6 million Americans who are Muslim. It's devastating our entire country, entire generations, young people who are watching in real time as this bigotry is not only tolerated, but it's rewarded. And corporate media has been more outraged at the possibility of a democratic socialist like Zoran Mamdani becoming New York's mayor than the certainty that a white supremacist is in the White House. The same outlets that condemn Mamdani over things he never actually said, meanwhile shrug as Donald Trump openly repeats the racism that he definitely said. And Trump, by the way, he's taken this national, taken his national platform to attack Mamdani and condemn him at every turn, threatening to arrest him, to deport him, to strip him of citizenship, calling him a communist lunatic. List goes on and on and on. And big tech isn't far behind. Elon Musk, a formerly undocumented white immigrant, can openly dehumanize Muslims and face no consequences whatsoever. He's still deemed as American as apple pie. VC, Sean McGuire, has gone on just unhinged, lengthy disinformation tirade against Mamdani. He's faced zero accountability. He's accused all American Muslims of coming from a culture where lying is a virtue. It's nonsensical. And he's faced zero consequences. In fact, after a letter was sent asking for accountability, a counter letter was sent, signed by dozens of fellow Silicon Valley VCs and CEOs and entrepreneurs, and they actually back McGuire, saying that no, his words aren't hate speech. They actually call his hate speech, his bigotry, reflections of a principled thinker. Just nonsensical. The Republicans, as expected, are going full throttle with this anti-Muslim hate. They've long called us terrorists, demanding loyalty tests and pushed legislation to monitor us and ban us and silence us. Recent tweet by MAGA racist Congressman Randy Fine, directed at Congressman Ilhan Omar, calls her and all Muslims terrorists. But here's the thing. We expected this out of Republicans. This is kind of the mantra that they've taken on, that they're going to be the racist party that appeals to straight white men, and that's it. But what's really sad is to watch Democrats joining in. And this is probably the most devastating part, if you think about it, because there's very little that Republicans have said to dehumanize American Muslims that some Democratic Party leaders have not also said and face no consequences thereof. Right now, Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer are following a similar playbook. They're asking Mamdani to denounce statements he never made while ignoring the ongoing violent, racist, anti-Muslim rhetoric that Trump shouts from every podium. Even more disturbing, New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand accused Mamdani of supporting global jihad and terrorism. Just a baseless and reckless smear. She, in this interview with Brian Laird, she doubles and triples down, refusing to acknowledge that she was lying and spreading disinformation. And then after immense pressure, immense time and pressure, during this big ugly bill was about to pass, we could have spent the time pressuring Republicans to vote no, but no, we had to spend time asking her to treat us like human beings. She finally apologized to Zoran Mamdani in private. She still has not issued any kind of public apology. And look, my thing is, if you're going to make a publicly bigoted statement, you better have a public apology as well. That's only fair. You don't get to be a bigot in public and then quietly say, oh, I'm sorry, I messed up. No, you need to be public about that as well. Anything less is a refusal to acknowledge the harm that has been inflicted on millions of Muslims watching this unfold. But that's the reality that we face right now. We're seeing democratic institutions and democratic candidates like Whitney Tilson, who was a long shot New York mayoral candidate, who New York Times tacitly endorsed, putting out mailers accusing Mamdani of wanting to kill Jewish Americans. This is barbaric. And by the way, I have to give a shout out to Jewish New Yorkers who saw that mailer by Tilson and said, "Not in our name." They loudly and openly condemned Tilson's Islamophobic bigotry. And I commend these amazing Jewish New Yorkers for standing up for humanity and justice. This is what humanity is all about. This is why also I'm adamant in condemning anti-Semitism. Because look, anti-Semitism and Islamophobia are two sides of the same coin. Fundamentally, two sides of the same coin. And it's critical that Jews and Muslims stand united against this kind of hate and bigotry. Diana Buttu and I talked about this just a minute ago, of how many Jewish people are standing up in solidarity with Palestinians and saying, "Not in our name." It's a powerful testament of the power of unity, of the nobility of that unity against hate. And to see Jewish and Muslim New Yorkers standing against Tilson's bigotry is a microcosm of the broader efforts by Jewish and Muslim people to stand against bigotry in general. But I think at the same time, to build on that, we can't kid ourselves of the work that remains before us, because this is not just about political reputations or campaign narratives. When elected officials and national outlets spread these kinds of lies about Muslims, they invite real violence into our communities. Hate speech leads to hate crimes. Dehumanization leads to murder. And the psychological toll on Muslim children, on our daughters, our sons, our students, our neighbors, that is immeasurable. Because they're watching, they're internalizing. And unless we act, these will carry these acts will result in scars that these children will carry for a lifetime. And by the way, this is not just Muslim children. All children are watching. All children are seeing the normalization of this hate and learning how to hate. This is why we cannot be silent. This is why we must continue to loudly speak up against such hate. So I will say this, that I'm grateful for this community that continues to fight back. I'm grateful to all who listen, that see through the disinformation and focus on truth, that refuses to let racism or Islamophobia or anti-Semitism or authoritarianism define who we are or what our future holds. If you're listening, then you're part of that movement, and I thank you for that. And I'm asking you, stay engaged. Continue to speak out. Speak out in your schools. Speak out in your churches. Speak out in your synagogues, your temples, your mosques, in your community centers. Continue to engage, because the more you speak out for justice and humanity, the more people are going to be inspired by you. And the more people who are provocateurs will realize that they're not going to just get away with being bigots and not be challenged for their bigotry. And we see these small acts of courage wherever we go. I just read about battle buddies, about how more than 200 veterans of the US military are going to asylum hearings with Afghan refugees. Because we know that ICE fascists are attending these immigration hearings and trying to arrest people at these immigration hearings. And these veterans are saying, "Nuh-uh, not in our name. We stand in solidarity. We took an oath to uphold the US Constitution, and the US Constitution mandates due process of law. It mandates the humanity of every person. And these Afghan refugees, these asylees who are seeking due process, who are seeking the legal documented immigration route, they deserve our protection." And it speaks to how ICE fascists aren't actually about documented immigration. They just hate Black and brown people. And we're seeing that in the way they're attacking Haitians and Venezuelans and Afghans and Sudanese. We're seeing that. And that's why I love the courage shown by these US Army veterans, and they're dubbing themselves battle buddies, US military veterans broadly, to say, no, we are not going to sit idly by. These Afghan allies helped us against the Taliban, and now we are going to help them against ICE. And the fact that ICE is aligning themselves with the Taliban, that's a bold choice for them to make. It's a shameful choice for them to make, but that's the choice that ICE is making. And I immensely commend these military veterans for standing on the right side of history, using their power, their privilege, their citizenship to say, we are going to stand between these ICE fascists and these Afghan refugees who risk their lives to protect us and our safety, and we are going to repay the favor now. That to me is powerful. That's the kind of courage I encourage you guys to keep engaging in. Use your power and your privilege to uphold justice and humanity. All right, my friends, thank you all for tuning in. Be sure to follow us on social media at Qasim Rashid across all platforms. Be sure to hit that subscribe button if you're listening on Substack, because your subscriptions make this work possible. My work is never behind a paywall, but your subscriptions help continue to fuel this work. We got a great show lined up for next week. Be sure to tune in same time, same place, at 10 a.m. Eastern on Sunday on SiriusXM if you want to listen to it live on channel 126, or hit subscribe on the Substack and we can get it in your inbox every single week as well. My friends, be fierce, lead with compassion and justice, and continue speaking truth to power. Till next week, peace.